Dukes of Hazzard first aired in 1979. Just two good old boys, never meaning no harm.
Making their way the only way they know how. That's just a little bit old in the noble line.
At least according to the show's theme song, Good Old Boys by Waylon Jennings, who is also the show's narrator. The show is actually based on the 1975 movie, Moonrunners, itself being loosely based on real moonshine runner and racer Jerry Elijah Rushing, who did cameos in both the Moonrunners movie and the Dukes of Hazzard's TV show. Most of the character names were changed from the movie, although some only partially, and a few not at all, such as Sheriff Roscoe P. Coltrane. The primary focus of the story is around two cousins, called Bo and Luke Duke in the TV show, who are on probation for bootlegging and spend their time fending off corrupt government officials, which usually means a car chase and often a jump. As they are not allowed to use guns, they instead use bows and dynamite. Luke is the older, more mature, experienced cousin, being a former boxer and ex-Marine, while Bo is the playboy and race car driver, whose car is a '69 Dodge Charger known as the General Lee. They are under the guidance of their Uncle Jesse, also a former moonshiner and runner, whose daily driver is a white '73 Ford F-100 pickup, but he has had more than his share of moonrunners, which includes Sweet Tilly, an undefined 40 or 41 four-door sedan that may be stored in a barn somewhere. If you have your own guess of what this might actually be, let me know. His last moonrunner was a blacked-out '71 Ford Custom 500 called Black Tilly, and there is a '67 Mustang notchback that Cooter gives him to race Boss Hogg, dubbed Black Tilly 2. Other members of the family include their other cousin Daisy, whose trademark short cut-off shorts would become known as Daisy Dukes. Daisy's original car is a '74 Plymouth Roadrunner, which although was only used in the show for the first season and a half, was not always a Roadrunner, or a '74. But after her '71 Plymouth Satellite Sebring has crashed, she gets a 1980 Jeep CJ7, essentially a Golden Eagle that instead says Dixie on it. That she keeps for the rest of the show. The Duke's primary ally is Crazy Cooter, owner of Cooter's Garage, who appears in a number of various cars, including his tow truck, which depending on the episode could be a Ford, Chevy, or GMC of various years, although the official Dukes of Hazzard scale model was a '71 Chevy. The primary antagonist would be County Commissioner Jefferson Davis Hogg, typically referred to simply as Boss Hogg, Uncle Jesse's longtime rival and frenemy, and the man who has control of pretty much everything in the fictional Hazzard County. In the show, he is mostly chauffeured around in his '70 Cadillac DeVille convertible with bull horns mounted on the front, itself becoming an iconic TV car. And he too was once a moonshine runner, driving the so-called Gray Ghost, and in his race against Uncle Jesse, a '68 Camaro called Gray Ghost Jr. He is assisted primarily by his inept brother-in-law, Sheriff Roscoe P. Coltrane, and caught in the middle is the somewhat naive Deputy Enos Strait. So when real police are needed, they are often brought in from elsewhere, such as Sheriff Edward Thomas Little, or Big Ed, from the neighboring county. The police cars are typically Mopars, Furies, Coronets, and such, and wrecked in almost every show. Jerry Rushing's actual bootlegging car was a 1958 Chrysler 300D named Traveler, after General Lee's horse. In the Moonrunners movie, Traveler is an orange, and sometimes partially blue, '55 Chevy stock car. But for the TV show, instead of trying to explain the name Traveler, they just changed the name of the car to General Lee. Originally, the General Lee was Corvette Flame Red, which is to say reddish-orange, and had crossed flags painted behind the back window. That would later be removed. The interior was tan, and the wheels were American Racing Vectors with Shelby center caps. But after the initial 6 cars were wrecked, replacements were contracted out and were effectively slapped together. And by season 3, Warner Brothers was getting tons of fan mail, or hate mail, about the inconsistencies of the cars. Random shades of orange, ranging from Hemi orange to Gremlin orange. Different colored interiors, with different options. Some having vinyl top trim, some not, and so on. So in 1983, the studio took back over making the cars with a list of guidelines to keep them mostly consistent, after making a few detail changes, although both 68 and 69 models were still used. With all the crashes, jumps, hood slides, and other stunts, some estimates suggest that more than 350 Chargers were destroyed over the 7 seasons, and only 17 cars used in the show survived. In fact, towards the end of the series, replacement cars were getting so hard to find that they started using models for some stunts, something that did not go over well with fans. When real stunts were being done, the cars were sandbagged in the rear to balance them out for the jumps, and in some cases, the front was raised to better take the impact of the landing. Season 7 started with a General Lee origin story that didn't really tell much about the car, other than that Uncle Jesse named it, and they used orange-red paint Cooter happened to have on hand. Over the 7 seasons, half the characters were temporarily replaced at one time or another, including Bo and Luke Duke, being replaced for most of Season 5 by other cousins. Vance and Coy, due to a contract dispute. Crazy Cooter was also temporarily replaced by various cousins of his own, over disputes with the studio. There was even an alternate sheriff for a while, for similar reasons. And Officer Enos left the show for a while to do his own spin-off show, Enos.
Buckle up now.
Which didn't take off. But the Dukes of Hazzard remained one of the most watched shows of the early 80s, with a huge list of cameos that ranged from singer Tammy Wynette to race car driver Cale Yarborough. And the phrase Dukes of Hazzard would become synonymous with car jumps. The show would see a revival as reruns in the late 90s that would inspire 2 made-for-TV movies, The Dukes of Hazzard Reunion in 1997 and The Dukes of Hazzard in Hollywood in 2000. Then the feature film arrived for 2005, with a cast of stars that included Burt Reynolds as Boss Hogg.
I have $100 for whoever knocks him out.
Whose car was now a 1977 Eldorado, and Willie Nelson as Uncle Jesse.
Divorces are so expensive. No! Because they're worth it.
It did fairly well in theaters, but critics considered it one of the worst films of the year. Some say because it was not true to the source material, and some say because the source material was no longer socially acceptable. Most likely a combination of both. But what it did give you was Jessica Simpson and Daisy Dukes.
Problem, sugar?
I think something bounced up into my undercarriage.
A continuous drift scene. And some jumps. Some of which were cable-launched cars minus driver and drivetrain, and destroying more 68, 69, and 70 Chargers. Oh, and there were arrows with dynamite, and other explosions. The movie General Lee had its own sort of origin story, with Cooter giving it the iconic paint job all on his own, as well as a 426 Hemi, the only engine not used in the TV show, as it was too heavy and too expensive. The movie would be followed 2 years later by another made-for-TV movie, this time as a full origin story called The Dukes of Hazzard: The Beginning. I would say it rewrote the story from the TV show, but I suspect they didn't bother to check if there was any, as it included yet another General Lee origin story and an all-new cast, with the exception being Willie Nelson returning as Uncle Jesse. Although it did terribly, it has a higher Rotten Tomatoes rating than the feature film, but the car has always been the star, something many other shows have tried to duplicate, most of them failing. So as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment below and like and subscribe.